She stepped onto the weathered porch, her hands trembling as if the very wind carried memories she could not shake. The small town lay silent, the only sound the soft creak of the wooden boards beneath her boots. She had traveled far, fleeing the shadows of a life that had left her hollow, yearning for something she could not yet name. The air smelled of dry earth and distant smoke, carrying a hint of pine from the foothills beyond. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the empty street, where the wooden facades of shops and homes seemed frozen in time, untouched by the rush of the outside world. It was there, leaning against the rail of a wide porch shaded by the late morning sun, that he appeared. Not a man of polite society, not a gentle figure meant to blend with the quiet town. He was tall, larger than anyone she had ever seen, his presence undeniable. The kind of presence that made the wind itself pause, the kind of figure that demanded attention without a word. His skin was bronzed from countless days under the unforgiving sun, muscles coiled beneath a simple shirt, hands scarred from work and battles alike. Yet there was a softness to his eyes, a flicker of something human amid the strength, and it caught her off guard. "I need a giant husband," she said, the words trembling at first, then finding their strength. They were not words thrown carelessly into the air. They were a confession, a declaration of the loneliness that had shadowed her every step. The Apache beside her, silent until now, tilted his head, his gaze narrowing, not in judgment, but in curiosity. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, and for a brief heartbeat, the sun seemed to burn brighter, reflecting off his sharp features. "I want to feel loved once more," she added, her voice catching as she dared to hope that someone could understand the ache that had haunted her nights. He studied her then, and she could feel the weight of his thoughts, the careful consideration of someone who had learned long ago that words were often weaker than actions. The town had whispered of him for years, a man known as much for his fierceness as for the unspoken code of honor he carried. Few had dared to meet him face to face. Fewer still had managed to leave his presence without their life changed in some way. Yet here she was, trembling yet determined, daring to meet those eyes and speak truths that had stayed buried for far too long. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant clatter of a wagon rolling over worn cobblestones. He took a slow step forward, boots scuffing the dust, and she felt a ripple of apprehension run through her. Not fear, not quite, but a shiver of anticipation. His gaze never wavered, and in it she could see reflections of battles she could not name, of nights spent alone, of responsibilities that weighed heavier than any mountain. It was a gaze that had seen much, yet it held a glimmer of something unexpected, something human. "I've walked through deserts of my own," he said finally, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of experience, yet not without a touch of vulnerability. "Seen people lose everything they held dear and keep walking." His words struck her like a sudden wind, both comforting and chilling. She nodded, understanding without needing to speak, that he recognized the quiet desperation that had driven her across hills and plains to this moment. The town itself seemed to shrink around them, the wooden buildings fading into the background as if the world had decided to hold its breath for what would come next. Children peeked from behind doors and windows, sensing the gravity of the moment, while old men paused in their routines, hands resting on canes, watching the meeting of two souls whose paths had been carved by hardship and longing. "I've been strong for too long," she whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for him to hear. "I've built walls around my heart, but I am tired of being alone." Her words hung in the air, fragile and raw, and for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps strength could come not from solitude, but from trust. He shifted his weight, and the sound of leather against wood seemed loud in the sudden quiet. "And what makes you think I can give you what you need?" His question was not a challenge, but an invitation, a test of sincerity and courage. Her heart pounded in her chest, a steady drumbeat of nervous hope. She stepped closer, feeling the warmth radiating from him, an unspoken promise that presence alone could be enough to fill the emptiness she had carried. "Because I can see it in you," she said simply. "The way you hold yourself, the way your eyes soften when no one else is looking. I know you've carried pain, just as I have. I know you understand what it means to fight for what you believe in. That's why I am here. That's why I believe in you." He remained silent, studying her as if weighing the truths of her words against the armor he had worn all his life. She could see the flicker of memories behind his eyes, battles fought in the name of survival, nights spent alone under endless stars, moments of vulnerability buried beneath layers of strength. There was a hardness in him, yes, but there was also a flicker of recognition, a mirror reflecting her own longing back at her. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful. "It's not an easy life, this path we walk. Being giant, being strong, it doesn't come with comfort. Love, it doesn't come easy to people like us." His gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the legend, a man capable of tenderness even as he bore the weight of a harsh world. "I know," she said, taking a careful step forward, closing some of the distance between them. "I don't want easy. I want real. I want someone who will fight beside me, not just for survival, but for the chance to feel something more, to feel alive, to feel loved." Her voice cracked at the last word, but she did not retreat. She stood her ground, a small but steadfast figure facing a man whose shadow stretched across the earth and into the very fabric of her longing. He exhaled slowly, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the land itself, the dust and heat and wind that shaped this world. "You speak boldly," he said, almost as if surprised by her courage. "Boldness is rare in a place like this, and rarer still in someone who has known loss as deeply as you have." The sky above had turned a sharp, burning gold, streaked with clouds that seemed to move in rhythm with the tension between them. In that fleeting moment, the world felt suspended, caught between day and night, past and future, longing and fulfillment. She felt the pull of destiny, or perhaps it was hope, urging her forward even as uncertainty gnawed at the edges of her resolve. "I have no promise to give," he continued, his voice heavy yet honest. "No guarantee that this path will be safe or kind. But I can promise this: whatever comes, I will stand. I will not falter. And if you choose to walk with me, we will face the world as it is, together." His words struck her with a clarity that made her heart leap, a promise formed not in idle sentiment but in steel-forged truth. She stepped closer still, the space between them shrinking until it felt as though the sun itself had drawn them into its warmth. She could see the lines of his face, the strength in his jaw, the storm and the calm within his eyes. Her own pulse quickened, not from fear, but from a quiet certainty that this meeting, this confession, had changed the course of her life. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Ready to be seen, ready to be known, ready to take the risk of feeling alive again." The wind stirred, lifting strands of her hair, and she felt as though the world itself had leaned closer, listening to the fragile, powerful moment between them. He nodded, slow and deliberate, and for a heartbeat, the world felt still. Then he reached out, his hand rough but sure, and she took it, feeling the strength that had carried him through countless trials. In that simple touch, there was an unspoken agreement, a silent acknowledgement that two wounded souls could find strength in one another. Yet even as their hands met, the horizon held shadows that neither could ignore. Stories of hardship, whispers of enemies and trials yet to come, lingered just beyond the edge of town. The path ahead was uncertain, the days ahead likely filled with challenge and fire. But for now, beneath the blazing sky, amidst the quiet streets of a town that seemed to watch and wait, they stood together, two figures poised on the brink of something neither fully understood, yet both were willing to chase. And so it began, a story of courage, of longing, of hearts laid bare against a harsh world, a story that would test their strength, their trust, and their willingness to embrace the possibility of love once more. The Apache, the giant who had known battles and loneliness alike, and the woman who dared to speak her truth, stood together at the edge of destiny, knowing that the next step could change everything, yet unable to resist the pull of something greater, something worth risking all for. As the wind shifted and the first shadows of evening stretched across the town, a quiet tension settled over the land. They did not speak, yet the promise lingered, a fragile flame in the vast expanse of uncertainty. Something was coming, something that would challenge both heart and soul, yet for the first time in long years, there was hope, there was connection, and there was the possibility of a future neither had dared imagine. And in that suspended moment, as the horizon burned with the last light of day, the question remained, could two wounded hearts, so different in strength yet united in longing, survive the trials that lay ahead and find the love they both so desperately sought? The answer would not come easily, and it would not come tonight, but the first step had been taken. And in the quiet of that sunlit town, two figures stood together, ready to face whatever the world would throw at them, bound by a fragile, unspoken promise and the hope of feeling alive once more. The wind whispered through the town, carrying a sense of change, and somewhere beyond the hills, the first hint of danger stirred, a reminder that the road ahead would test them in ways they could not yet see, leaving them to wonder whether courage, strength, and love would be enough to survive. The evening air had cooled, carrying a sharp edge that hinted at the coming night. Shadows stretched long across the dusty streets, and the town, so still in the day, seemed to breathe with a life of its own under the deepening sky. She walked alongside him now, her hand still finding his in the quiet moments between words. Yet she felt the pull of questions she could not yet ask. Every town has its secrets, and she could sense that this one had its share of stories whispered in the dark, lives lived quietly while the world passed by. He led her past the rows of wooden buildings, past the general store with its creaking sign swinging lazily in the wind, past the blacksmith's shop where the clink of hammer against metal rang even at this hour. Each step seemed to pull them further from the ordinary, further into a world where survival was measured in strength and courage, where the past was never far behind and the future carried unknown dangers. He did not speak much, but she did not mind. There was a kind of quiet understanding between them, a recognition that words were sometimes unnecessary when presence could say everything. As they walked, the town's history began to reveal itself in small details. The faded paint on a saloon door, a half-broken wagon wheel leaning against a fence, a board nailed haphazardly over a shuttered window. Each fragment seemed to tell a story, and she wondered what had shaped this place, what had hardened its people into the faces they now wore. She sensed that he knew more than he let on, that his connection to this land went beyond mere residence. His boots scuffed the dirt with familiarity, and his eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the horizon as if expecting trouble at any moment. "You've been here long?" she asked finally, breaking the silence that had stretched comfortably between them. "Long enough to know the wind carries warnings," he said. His voice was low, steady, almost tired. But there was a hint of something in his tone, something that suggested he carried more than just knowledge of the land. He carried memories, battles fought not just with weapons but with people, with time, with circumstance. He glanced at her as if weighing how much of himself to reveal, and she met his gaze without flinching, her curiosity stronger than her caution. He paused by an old wooden fence, running a calloused hand along the weathered posts. "This town," he said slowly, "it isn't as quiet as it seems. People move carefully here. Watch each other carefully. They've seen too much, lost too much." His eyes swept over the horizon, settling briefly on the distant hills that seemed dark and imposing even in the last light of day. "It's a place where survival isn't just about strength. It's about knowing when to act and when to wait. And about knowing who you can trust." She listened closely, taking in the weight of his words. There was more here than met the eye. She could sense the tension in the air, a subtle hum beneath the normal sounds of the town. There were forces at work she could not yet name, and a part of her wanted to retreat, to leave behind the uncertainty for the safety of the unknown. Yet another part of her, the part that had brought her here, urged her forward. She wanted answers. She wanted to know the man beside her, and she wanted to know the land that had shaped him into the giant she now trusted without question. "Why do they call you tough?" she asked, curiosity threading through her voice. She had heard whispers in the town, faint echoes of stories told in hushed tones about a man larger than life, fierce in battle yet unyielding in principle. She wanted to understand the man behind the reputation, the layers beneath the surface of the legend. He laughed softly, a sound that was deep and resonant, like rolling thunder across a canyon. "Tough?" he repeated, almost as if the word itself carried weight. "I'm just a man who has had to make hard choices. There's nothing heroic about it. You survive or you don't. Sometimes you protect, sometimes you fight, and sometimes you learn that even the strongest have to bend." His eyes found hers, and she felt the honesty in his words, the unpolished truth that made her heart tighten with a strange combination of respect and longing. The sun had dipped further below the horizon now, leaving a burnished sky streaked with fading gold and purple. The shadows deepened, stretching long across the empty streets, and the air grew cooler still. She felt the pull of the night, a reminder that darkness carried more than chill, it carried danger. It carried stories untold, and it carried the kind of secrets that could shift a person's path in an instant. "They speak in whispers here," he continued, his voice dropping lower, almost blending with the rustle of dry leaves across the dirt street. "About the things that come through the hills. About strangers who vanish, about deals that aren't spoken of aloud. There are people here who know more than they say, and others who pretend they know nothing but are watching all the same." He gave her a sideways glance, one that carried a hint of warning. "You need to be careful. Even small mistakes can carry consequences far beyond what you imagine." Her pulse quickened at his words, a mixture of excitement and fear threading through her chest. She had come seeking a new beginning, yet she could already feel the threads of conflict pulling her into a story much larger than herself. She realized that the giant beside her was not just a protector or a companion. He was a guide through this world of hidden dangers, a man who had lived through trials she could only imagine, and yet there was a fragility beneath his strength, a past that shaped the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he held himself. "Have you faced them?" she asked cautiously, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. She did not know what "them" meant, but she sensed the question would uncover layers of truth he might not have shared before. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Once or twice. Enough to know that the world can take more than you expect. Enough to know that even the strongest need allies, need people who will stand beside them when the weight of the land, the choices, the battles, when it all bears down, there has to be someone you can trust." His words lingered in the air, heavy with the kind of weight that could not be shaken off easily. She felt the pull of his gaze, and for the first time, the town, the hills, the fading sunlight, even the whispering wind, all of it seemed to fade into the background. She focused on him, on the way he carried the weight of unseen battles without complaint, on the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, and on the sense of raw honesty that radiated from every line of his face. She realized then that the man beside her was more than just a protector. He was a story, a living proof of struggle, endurance, and resilience. "You've lost something," she said softly, the words slipping out almost without her realizing. "Something you carry every day and you don't speak of it." He looked away briefly, his jaw tightening, and she saw the shadow of memory cross his face. "We all carry losses," he said finally, his voice low, almost quiet. "Some we speak of, some we bury deep. You learn to live with them, or they will consume you. But loss is not weakness. It's proof that you've survived, that you've fought, that you've felt." Her heart beat faster, the rhythm matching the rising tension she could feel in the land around them. This was more than a story of two people meeting. It was the intersection of pasts, of scars carried quietly beneath the surface, of lives shaped by forces beyond their control. She felt both awe and a strange comfort in his presence, knowing that he had faced trials as real as her own, and that perhaps together they could navigate the dangers lurking beyond the town, beyond the hills, beyond the quiet streets where shadows hid more than just darkness. As night fell fully, stars appearing faintly in the wide, open sky, the town seemed to close in around them. Lights flickered in windows, and somewhere in the distance, the soft howl of a coyote echoed across the plains. It was a sound she had never felt fear from before, but now it seemed to warn her that the quiet they had walked through was only a thin veil. There were storms ahead, literal and figurative, challenges that would test the strength of both body and spirit. "I have seen what the night can bring," he said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "And the things that move in darkness aren't always beasts. Sometimes it's people, sometimes it's choices, sometimes it's the consequences of the past catching up. We have to be ready." She nodded, understanding the gravity of his words, feeling the tension deepen, a knot of anticipation she could neither untangle nor ignore. This was a world where strength alone was not enough, where trust was earned in moments of danger, and where every decision could ripple through lives like a stone cast into still water. And yet she felt drawn into it, drawn to him, to the giant beside her, to the possibility that courage and honesty could carve a path through even the thickest darkness. They reached the edge of town, where the last few buildings gave way to the rough, open land beyond. The hills loomed in the distance, dark shapes against the fading starlight. She sensed the unknown pressing toward them, a tension she could feel in her bones, a story waiting to unfold, full of danger, choice, and the fragile possibility of trust and connection. He stopped, turning to face her fully. "This is where the quiet ends," he said, voice low and steady. "Everything beyond this is uncertain. But if we walk forward, we walk together. That is the only way we survive what's coming." Her hand found his once more, and she felt the strength in his grip, the promise and the unspoken words, and the thrill of stepping into a world that was larger, harsher, and yet somehow more alive than anything she had known. And so, beneath the stars and the whisper of the wind, they stood at the threshold of something neither fully understood. The town behind them held stories untold. The hills before them held danger unseen. And between them lay a fragile bond, untested but powerful, carrying the hope that together they might face what the night and life would bring next. The first chill of approaching night brushed her cheek, and a distant sound of movement stirred the darkness beyond the hills. A warning, or perhaps the beginning of a challenge neither had anticipated. She felt it in her heart, in the tightening of her chest, and she knew that the journey they had begun would demand courage, trust, and a willingness to face not just the world, but the shadows within themselves. The giant beside her shifted, eyes scanning the horizon, body coiled with readiness. She tightened her grip on his hand, feeling the strength and the warmth and the promise of a protector and a companion who had survived battles she could only imagine. Yet even as she felt that comfort, she sensed the stirrings of something larger, something that would not wait for preparation or understanding. The night held its breath, the stars glimmering faintly like distant eyes watching. And in the quiet before the storm, the woman and the Apache stood together, poised on the edge of a story that would test everything they knew about survival, about trust, about the fragile, fierce power of human connection. The wind shifted again, sharper now, carrying the scent of dry grass and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. She tightened her grip on his hand, feeling the way his fingers wrapped around hers with a strength that made her feel both safe and vulnerable at once. They had stepped beyond the town, past the last flickering lantern, into a land that was untamed and unfamiliar. The hills ahead were dark ridges, jagged and foreboding, as though they held secrets the night would not reveal easily. The Apache's gaze swept constantly, trained by years of experience, and she found herself watching him as closely as he watched the horizon. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, pointing toward the hills. A low rumble carried faintly on the wind, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her pulse quicken. He nodded slightly, not looking at her but listening. "It's not the wind," he said quietly. "Something moves out there. Something big, or maybe a group. Could be animals, could be men. Either way, they are not far, and they are aware of us." His voice held a calm authority that belied the tension in the air. She knew by instinct that every word he spoke was measured, that he did not raise alarms lightly. They pressed on, the ground uneven beneath their boots, roots and stones threatening to trip them at every step. The night felt alive, thick with the sense of unseen eyes and hidden movement. Somewhere behind a ridge, a faint light flickered, too controlled to be fire alone. She wondered if they had stumbled into something dangerous, a confrontation waiting in the shadows, and she realized that her heart had begun to beat with the thrill of uncertainty. He slowed his pace, signaling her to do the same. "We're not alone," he said, voice dropping lower. "And whoever they are, they have been watching for a while. They know we left the town." She swallowed hard, feeling the tension coil in her chest. Why would anyone care? "Because some things in this land do not like strangers," he said. His gaze darted to the dark ridge ahead. "Some things do not forgive intrusions. And some people are willing to do whatever it takes to keep what they have. Or take what they want." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. She realized that the world she had stepped into was not simple. The peaceful town she had seen by daylight, the quiet streets and the faces that had welcomed her with cautious eyes were only a thin layer. Beneath it lay struggles, ambitions, secrets. And somehow, she was now part of it. As they moved closer to the ridge, they came across tracks in the dry dirt footprints that were larger than human, deep and deliberate. The Apache knelt, running a rough hand along the edge of one print, his brow furrowed. "These are recent," he murmured. "They've been here within hours. Whoever or whatever made them knows this land." They moved carefully, but with purpose. Her stomach tightened. She wanted to turn back, to return to the safety of the town, but she could not. Not when the questions burning inside her were stronger than fear. She felt a strange thrill in knowing that the unknown had finally found them, and that their journey was no longer just about survival, but about facing something larger than themselves. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from above, a sharp crack of a branch, and they froze. He dropped to one knee, instinctively shielding her behind him. She felt the tension in his body, the readiness in every muscle. The night seemed to grow darker, deeper, as if swallowing them whole. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Not tall, not as massive as the Apache, but moving with a predator's grace. Its movements were calculated, deliberate, and she sensed immediately that this was no ordinary traveler. The figure stopped a few yards away, hands raised slightly in a gesture that could be surrender or a trap. "You shouldn't be here," the stranger said, voice low and smooth, carrying authority and menace in equal measure. "This land is not for those who do not know its rules." The Apache stood slowly, placing himself between her and the figure. "We follow no rules except those that keep us alive," he said firmly. His eyes locked with the stranger's, measuring, calculating. "We pass through. You do not stop us." The stranger laughed softly, almost mockingly. "Many have tried. Few survive." The tension stretched taut, and she felt her heart racing with fear and anticipation. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but her voice seemed caught in her throat. Instead, she watched, fascinated and terrified, as the two men, one a towering figure of strength, the other sleek and cunning, measured each other in silence. Then the stranger shifted, stepping closer, and she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a challenge, a threat, and perhaps a hint of curiosity. "I know who you are," he said, nodding slowly toward the Apache. "The one they call tough." "The giant. But even giants have weaknesses." "Even giants bleed." Her chest tightened. The words were meant to unsettle, to provoke fear, and they worked. But she also felt a spark of defiance rising within her. She would not let this stranger intimidate her. Not now, not ever. "You speak of weaknesses," the Apache said, voice calm but dangerous. "But you don't know what it takes to survive. You don't know what it takes to protect what matters." His gaze softened briefly, almost as if he were speaking to her as much as to the stranger. "I do." The figure paused, and for a moment the night seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a swift movement, he stepped back, vanishing into the shadows like a wraith. But the sense of danger did not leave. She knew instinctively that this was only the beginning, that the stranger would return or others like him, and that the hills were full of eyes watching, waiting. They continued on, moving carefully, the tracks beneath their feet now seeming almost like a trail left deliberately for them to follow. The Apache's grip on her hand remained firm, steady, a constant reassurance in the midst of the growing tension. She realized that she had never felt more alive, nor more afraid. Every step forward carried risk, but also the promise of uncovering truths long buried, of confronting challenges that would test their strength and trust in ways neither had imagined. As they reached the top of the ridge, the land fell away into a wide valley, shadowed and silent, with pockets of light marking distant cabins and fires. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down, the sense that the valley held secrets and stories not meant for casual eyes. The Apache scanned the area, muscles tensed, eyes sharp. "There," he said, pointing toward a small cluster of lights. "That is where the first of them gathers. We'll see what we're dealing with." She peered in the direction he indicated, trying to make sense of the shapes flickering in the firelight. Figures moved among the shadows, some bending, some standing tall, all deliberate in their motion. The valley seemed alive, and yet the movement was careful, almost predatory. She realized that these people or creatures had claimed this land in some way, and that their presence carried consequences that would ripple through every choice they made. "Who are they?" she asked, voice low. "People who will not let strangers walk freely," he said. His gaze remained fixed on the valley, analyzing, calculating. "People who see intrusions as threats, and threats must be dealt with." She felt a chill run down her spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She wanted to ask more, but the words felt useless. The valley, the shadows, the flickering fires spoke louder than any question she could voice. The world she had entered was one of tension, of hidden conflicts, and of danger lurking where least expected. The Apache moved quietly down the ridge, signaling her to follow. "We watch first," he said. "We learn. Rushing in without knowing what we face is the fastest way to lose everything." His hand tightened on hers, a reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty, there was safety and trust, in connection, in the bond forming between them. She nodded, heart pounding, as they crouched behind a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. The flickering fires revealed glimpses of faces, figures moving with purpose, some armed, some simply observing, all aware that the night had brought watchers of their own. She realized that this was a world layered with complexity, where alliances were hidden and danger was constant. Every decision mattered, every glance carried meaning. "They will test us," he said quietly, voice almost lost in the whisper of the wind. "They will look for weakness. They will look for fear. We cannot give them either. Not now, not ever." She nodded again, feeling the tension coil in her chest. She had stepped into a story larger than herself, into a world of hidden conflicts, watchful eyes, and threats that lurked in every shadow. And yet, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, she felt a strange exhilaration. She was alive, truly alive, walking alongside a man who had faced battles she could only imagine, trusting him with her safety, her heart, and her hope. The Apache adjusted his stance, scanning the valley below once more. "They are organized," he said. "This is not random. Whoever they are, they move with purpose. They expect something. And whatever it is, we will have to be ready." She leaned closer, feeling the rough brush of his sleeve against her arm. "Ready for what?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. Conflict, confrontation, danger, and tests that would demand everything they had. He did not answer immediately, only his eyes narrowing as he observed the valley. Then he said, voice low, "Ready for what comes next." Because nothing in this land waits for the cautious. And tonight will tell us much about what we face. The wind carried a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the distant shift of movement, and she felt a tightening in her chest. The night had grown colder, sharper, alive with tension and anticipation. The valley below was a stage, the flickering fires actors in a drama she was only beginning to understand. And she knew instinctively that the story unfolding would test courage, trust, and the fragile beginnings of something she had not dared hope for, connection and perhaps love. She glanced at the Apache beside her, feeling the weight of his presence, the promise in his steady hand, and the unspoken understanding that whatever awaited in the shadows, they would face it together. Yet even as she felt that reassurance, a knot of unease remained. The valley, the flickering fires, the figures moving carefully among the darkness, they were a warning that the night had many stories to tell, and not all would be kind. The first distant shout carried on the wind, low and deliberate, followed by the echo of boots striking dirt. She stiffened, feeling her pulse quicken. The Apache's eyes flicked toward her, and she saw the subtle shift in his posture, the coiled readiness of a man who had faced far greater threats than this. "They've noticed something," he murmured, voice barely audible. "And tonight, we find out what it means." She gripped his hand tighter, heart hammering in her chest, knowing that the story was only beginning, that the conflict ahead would reveal truths, test limits, and force choices neither of them could yet foresee. And as the shadows deepened across the valley and the distant fires flickered like restless eyes, she realized that the night held more than danger. It held revelation, confrontation, and the beginning of a journey that would demand everything of them both. And so, crouched behind the rocks, watching the valley alive with tension and mystery, she understood the truth of the world she had stepped into. Nothing was simple. Nothing was safe. And every heartbeat carried the weight of the story yet to be told. The valley stretched before them like a shadowed battlefield, the fires flickering faintly as if warning of the dangers concealed in the darkness. Every figure moving among the lighted patches seemed purposeful, deliberate, their steps calculated. She crouched beside him, heart hammering in rhythm with his steady breath. The Apache did not speak, his eyes scanning, noting every detail, every subtle movement, as if he could read the intentions of those below before they had even acted. She had never seen anyone move with such precision, and it both reassured her and made her pulse race with anticipation. "They know we're here," he said quietly, voice almost a whisper carried by the wind, "and they're testing. They want to see if we will falter before the real challenge begins." She tightened her grip on his hand, the strength of it grounding her even as the tension built in the valley below. "What do we do?" she asked softly, though she knew the answer. She had come this far, and turning back was not an option. "Not now." "We wait," he replied, eyes never leaving the shadows. "We watch. We listen. And when the time comes, we strike with purpose. Anything else is wasted energy." A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping from one cluster of light to another, silent, careful. The Apache's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he followed the figure's path. "Scout," he muttered under his breath. "They're sending someone to assess, to find weaknesses. We can't let them." Her pulse quickened, This was no ordinary encounter. This was strategy, subtlety, and danger wrapped together. She realized the stories she had heard about him, the giant, the protector, the man who survived when others would falter, were true, but now she was seeing it firsthand. His mind moved faster than anyone she had known, analyzing, predicting, calculating risks, and yet there was an element of patience, a restraint born from experience that made her trust him completely. The scout moved closer to the ridge where they crouched, unaware of the careful eyes observing every step. The Apache shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the approaching figure, muscles coiled like springs ready to uncoil. Her heart leapt, caught between fear and exhilaration, the intensity of the moment pressing down on her like a physical weight. Then the scout froze, as if sensing the presence of the two watching from above. A faint hiss escaped him, but it was too late. The Apache moved, silent, precise, and the scout fell back into the shadows with a start, disappearing before she could even register the motion. "You see?" he whispered, his voice calm but edged with danger. "They notice, they react, but they don't expect. That is where we have the advantage." She nodded, though words felt inadequate. The tension in the valley had grown, the air thick with anticipation, as if the night itself waited for what was coming next. Every movement below was a potential threat, every flickering shadow a test of patience and courage. Hours seemed to stretch like days as they watched, analyzing, waiting. The figures below began to gather more boldly, forming small clusters, murmuring quietly, yet their vigilance never wavered. The Apache's eyes moved constantly, reading the subtleties of posture, gesture, and spacing, revealing more about their opponents than she could comprehend. "They're planning something," he said finally, voice low. "They won't attack yet, but soon. And when they do, it will be precise, calculated. They've learned from past encounters, and they know the cost of mistakes." Her chest tightened. She felt the pressure of impending conflict like a physical presence, a weight that threatened to crush the momentary calm she had felt. And yet, there was exhilaration too, a thrill that came from standing on the edge of the unknown with someone she trusted completely. "Will we be ready?" she asked, barely a whisper. "We will," he replied without hesitation, eyes fixed on the valley below. "But readiness is not just strength. It's timing, it's patience, it's knowing when to act and when to wait. And we have waited long enough." The first sign came as a distant shout carried by the wind across the valley. It was low, urgent, meant to provoke, to unsettle. Figures shifted among the shadows, some moving quickly, others standing still, all aware that the night had grown dangerous. The Apache's posture tightened, and she felt the coiled energy radiating from him. She gripped his hand harder, feeling his strength, his resolve, the promise that whatever came, they would face it together. Then another figure emerged, larger this time, moving with purpose toward the central fires. The Apache's eyes narrowed. "Leader," he muttered, voice tight with focus. "They are testing the command. Watch closely. Every decision they make now will reveal their strength, their weaknesses, and the first strike we must take." Her pulse raced. She had imagined conflict before, but nothing like this. Nothing that required patience, observation, and the precise measurement of danger at every turn. The valley below was alive with tension, and she realized that every second of this waiting, every whispered observation, was a battle in itself. The Apache moved closer, adjusting their position behind a low rock, keeping them concealed while maintaining a perfect view of the unfolding scene. "Stay close," he said quietly. "No matter what happens, we move as one. Hesitation is death out here." She nodded, heart pounding in rhythm with his words. The leader in the valley spoke now, voice carrying across the shadows, sharp and commanding. The group below shifted again, forming tighter clusters, communicating with gestures and low murmurs, preparing, testing, planning. The Apache studied every movement, his mind racing through scenarios, calculating risks and advantages. Suddenly, a flare shot up from the valley floor, bright against the darkened landscape. Figures froze for a moment, shadows stretching wildly, then scattered. The Apache's eyes tracked each movement, noting the reactions, reading intent, analyzing strategy. "They want to draw us out," he said. "They want to see if we will react too soon. And if we do, it will cost us." She felt a shiver run through her, but she did not pull away. She had come this far, and she would not falter now. She trusted him completely, trusted his judgment, his experience, his unwavering courage. And yet, the tension was almost unbearable. Every sound, every movement in the valley was magnified, every flicker of fire or shadow a potential threat. The night deepened, stars fading behind clouds, and the Apache finally lowered his hand to hers. "Soon," he said quietly, almost as a reassurance to both of them. "The real test is coming. The first strike, the real danger. It will happen before we expect, and it will demand everything we have." She nodded again, her throat tight, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The anticipation, the fear, the thrill, they mingled in a way she had never experienced. The story of this night, of this valley, of this confrontation, was building towards something she could feel in every heartbeat. Then, from the far edge of the valley, another movement caught their attention. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, moving swiftly, almost silently, forming a line that cut across the faint fires. The Apache's eyes narrowed, and he shifted slightly, bringing himself into a better position. "They are coordinated," he said, voice low but sharp. "And they are testing our patience. Every second counts now. One misstep and the advantage is lost." She felt the tension tighten like a rope around her chest. The night had become a living thing, pressing down, filled with unseen dangers and deliberate movements. She could feel the weight of history, of battles fought and won, of strategies measured and executed, all converging in this valley beneath the darkened sky. "They will move soon," he whispered. "And when they do, we will have to be faster, smarter, stronger. Trust in me as I trust in you. That is the only way we survive what is coming." Her grip tightened on his hand, she had no doubt. The giant beside her was a man who had faced more than most could imagine, and she knew that whatever unfolded in the valley below, they would meet it together. Yet even as she felt that reassurance, the tension stretched taut, the night thick with anticipation. Every sound amplified, every shadow a warning. From the darkness beyond the ridge, a distant shout echoed again, followed by the crunch of boots on dry grass. The figures in the valley shifted, some taking positions, others waiting, watching, testing. The Apache's eyes never wavered, reading every movement, analyzing every shift in posture, noting intent and strategy. "They are preparing," he murmured. "And we must be ready. Whatever comes first will set the tone for everything that follows. A single mistake now, and the outcome is decided." She felt her pulse race, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The anticipation, the fear, the thrill, they were all entwined now, a single, unbreakable thread leading to a moment that she could sense was fast approaching. The Apache beside her remained calm, a steady force in the eye of the storm, and she clung to that strength as if it were a lifeline. The first faint glow of movement appeared from the far end of the valley, shadows shifting, a signal perhaps, or a test of courage. The Apache's hand brushed hers, a reminder that they were not alone, that whatever came, they faced it together. She drew a deep breath, feeling the night press down, heavy with tension, heavy with possibility. "Soon," he said again, eyes fixed on the figures below. "Everything we have prepared for, everything we have endured, it comes to this. Watch closely, listen, move carefully. And when the time is right, act with everything you have." Her heart pounded. The night held its breath, the valley alive with expectation, and the story of this confrontation stretched taut. Every second a prelude to a climax she could feel in her bones. She knew that the moments ahead would test courage, trust, and the fragile bond that had formed between them, and that the resolution, the triumph, the happiness they sought hung just beyond the edge of the night, waiting for the first strike to set it all into motion. The wind whispered across the ridge again, carrying faint sounds from the valley below. The fires flickered, shadows danced, and the figures moved with calculated precision. She felt the tension coil tighter, every sense sharpened, every heartbeat echoing the unspoken knowledge that the storm was about to break. And in that still, fragile moment before action, she realized the truth of what they faced: danger, uncertainty, and the relentless pull of fate, all intertwined in a story that demanded courage, loyalty, and trust. The night waited, the valley watched, and they remained poised on the edge of the most intense moments of their journey, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the story was about to reach the tipping point and the first strike would change everything. The night broke like a held breath finally released. The first clash had begun with quiet precision, and then it erupted into motion. Figures surged across the valley, shadows colliding with shadows, every movement a test of courage and endurance. She clung to the Apache, feeling the ground tremble beneath hurried steps and the distant sounds of struggle that carried like echoes across the hills. The tension that had gripped her chest for hours now became energy, focused and sharp, guiding her through every beat of the night. The Apache moved like a force of nature, tall and unyielding, a presence that seemed to command the very earth beneath him. He intercepted threats before they could reach her, his hands strong and precise, his judgment flawless. She followed his lead, adrenaline sharpening her senses, her own instincts growing keener with every passing second. She realized she had never felt so alive, so connected, not just to him, but to the world around her, the land, the night, the movement of life and danger intertwining in ways she had only imagined before. The leader of the opposing group had made his presence known by now, stepping into the firelight with a confidence born of strategy and skill. The Apache's eyes met his, unflinching, and in that moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Words were unnecessary. The battle was not just of strength, but of presence, of courage, of the understanding that even the fiercest could bend under the right conditions. The confrontation was sharp, precise, and brief. Every step mattered, every choice carried consequences. And yet, through it all, she watched him, saw the way his movements were not just about force but about protecting her, about preserving what mattered even as chaos threatened to consume them. In the clash of shadows and firelight, the story of this night revealed itself not in victories or losses, but in loyalty, trust, and the quiet power of a bond forged under pressure. The leader faltered first, not from weakness, but from underestimating the unity between the Apache and her. A misstep, a hesitation, and the advantage shifted. The Apache's presence was overwhelming, not just in size but in the quiet authority he carried. He disarmed threats with precision, intercepted attacks before they landed, and guided her safely through the fray. Her own courage rose with every success, every narrowly avoided danger, until fear became exhilaration, and the night itself seemed to yield under their resolve. As the battle reached its height, the surrounding figures faltered. The confidence they had carried melted under the pressure of unwavering defense and tactical skill. The Apache never faltered, never wavered, and she felt herself strengthened by his steadiness. Together, they moved with rhythm, anticipation, and timing that no observer could match. The night became a proving ground, not just for survival, but for trust, for understanding, and for connection. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the valley was quiet. The fires smoldered, shadows retreated, and the figures who had tested them either disappeared or surrendered, recognizing that the night had belonged to the Apache and her. The tension that had seemed unbreakable finally dissolved, leaving a strange, heavy calm in its place. She looked around, breath-catching, as the full weight of what they had endured and overcome settled on her shoulders. He turned to her then, expression softened by fatigue but bright with triumph. "It's over," he said simply. "For now, at least. But remember, danger is never far in this land. Strength is not just about survival, it's about knowing when to act, when to trust, and when to wait." She smiled, feeling the relief seep into her bones, the tension finally unwinding. "I think I understand," she replied. "And I understand you too, in ways I never imagined. I didn't know what to expect when I came here, but now I see why the land, the people, even the night itself, mattered so much to you." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she felt the warmth of his hand linger. "And I see you," he said softly. "Stronger than you think, braver than you knew. You faced this night without faltering, and that is something no one can take from you." The sun climbed slowly, casting its golden light across the valley and turning the hills from dark silhouettes into rolling expanses of green and gold. She breathed in the morning air, feeling a sense of clarity and peace she had not known in years. The land seemed different now, not just a place of danger, but a place of possibility, of beginnings, of connection. She realized that the night had not only tested them, but had prepared them for what was to come, teaching lessons of courage, patience, and trust. They walked down into the valley together, each step lighter than before, the echoes of the night fading into memory. Figures in the distance watched them, some nodding in recognition, others retreating quietly, understanding that the story of the night belonged to those who had faced it head-on. She felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before, knowing that she had been part of something larger, something defining, alongside the man who had proven himself more than a protector. He was a guide, a companion, and a partner in every sense. As they reached the edge of the town, the streets quiet now in the soft morning light, she turned to him. "Will it always be like this?" she asked. "Threats, tests, danger waiting around every corner?" He smiled faintly, a gentle, reassuring curve of his lips. "Not always. Life here has challenges, yes, but it also has moments of peace, moments worth holding on to. And now, after tonight, we know that together we can face whatever comes. Strength isn't just about surviving, it's about choosing what to protect and knowing that you're never alone when you do." She felt the weight of those words, the meaning in every pause and gesture. The Apache had carried her through the night, not just physically but through fear, uncertainty, and tension. She had learned from him, grown with him, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hope, trust, and a sense of belonging that made the world seem less dangerous, less daunting. The town slowly awakened around them. Doors opened, voices called greetings, and life returned to its rhythms, soft and human against the backdrop of the hills and valleys. She realized that the night had changed more than the landscape. It had changed them, shaped them, and defined a bond that would remain unbroken. They walked through the streets hand in hand, no longer strangers, no longer uncertain. Each step carried a quiet confidence, a recognition that the trials of the night had been endured, the fears confronted, and the lessons learned. She glanced up at him, at the strength and warmth in his eyes, and felt a sense of peace she had not known she could experience. "You know," she said softly, "I think this land, this town, even the dangers, they were all meant to bring us here. To understand what matters." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps? Or perhaps we were ready all along, and the land simply gave us the chance to see it." She laughed lightly, a sound that seemed to echo through the quiet streets like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Then I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, and she meant it. The Apache pulled her closer, a protective, steady gesture that carried both reassurance and promise. "And I will be here," he said quietly, "through every challenge, every uncertainty. every night that tries to test us, together. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words, the promise of safety, trust, and unwavering strength. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. The day moved on, slow and steady, carrying with it the promise of renewal. The valley beyond the town seemed less threatening now, alive with possibility instead of fear. She felt the sense of closure that comes not from defeating every challenge, but from facing them with courage, with someone by your side, and with the knowledge that the lessons learned would shape every step forward. They walked through the town together, noticing small details they had missed in the night. The children playing near the well, the baker arranging fresh bread in the window, the soft chatter of neighbors greeting each other. Life carried on, steady and resilient, and she realized that this too was part of the story, the ordinary moments, the quiet victories, the peace that followed the storm. He paused by a small wooden bridge at the edge of town, turning to her. "This is where we rest for now," he said, voice soft. "But remember, life has many nights, many challenges. We cannot avoid them. But we can face them together, and that makes all the difference." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and warmth. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Not with you. Not when we're together." He smiled, a rare, gentle expression that seemed to carry the weight of every trial, every battle, every night endured. "And you never will be," he said. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the hills, the town, and the valley. Shadows retreated, the dangers of the night faded into memory, and a sense of quiet victory settled over them. She felt the promise of tomorrow, of days filled with hope, connection, and shared purpose. They stood together on the bridge, hands entwined, hearts aligned, looking out over the land they had faced and survived. The valley, the fires, the shadows, they were all part of the story now, part of the memory that had shaped them and would guide them forward. She realized that true strength was not just in surviving danger, but in embracing trust, love, and the quiet certainty that comes from sharing the journey with someone who stands beside you, unwavering and strong. The Apache's arm wrapped around her shoulder, pulling her close, and she leaned into him, feeling the solidity of his presence, the calm in his strength, and the warmth of connection that had grown from fear and tension into trust and hope. "Let's go home," he said quietly, and she knew that home was not just a place, but a state of being they had earned together through courage, through choice, and through the bonds they had formed in the darkest of nights. And as they walked back through the streets of the town, the sun fully risen now, she felt the sense of ending and beginning intertwined. The challenges had tested them, the fears had shaped them, and the night had taught them what truly mattered. And now, together, they could face whatever the future held, knowing that courage, trust, and love would carry them through. The story had reached its conclusion not in conflict, but in connection, not in fear, but in hope, not in solitude, but in the unwavering presence of someone who would never let go. And as the town awoke to the light of a new day, she knew that the journey they had shared would remain with them forever, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, strength, trust, and love could guide them home.